the human rights approach. The terrorism and violent extremism threats has become more diffuse with an increase in various regions of Indian subcontinent and Asia of terrorist acts, including those motivated by intolerance or extremism. The determination to combat this threat has crystallized in the UN resolution numbered 2148. But it's important to underline that respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law are complementary and mutually reinforcing with effective counterterrorism measures and are an essential part of a successful counterterrorism effort. Now, let us look at the factors leading to the spread of radicalization globally. The failure to comply with these international obligations is one of the factors contributing to increased radicalization and fosters a scene of impunity. When we look at this point, we clearly understand that if those who are into the process of combating radicalization follow the international obligations, the chances of the failures are pretty less. But as we see, the international obligations are much violated, and hence the failure is almost a success. Now, let us look at the key elements. Radicalization and violent extremism conducive to terrorism cannot and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, ethnic group, race, culture, or civilization. It has to be seen as an act of radicalization and violent extremism only. Searching for the root cause of radicalization must be a priority. In this regard, full respect of economic, social, and cultural rights are a key factor. Democracy and rule of law must be respected when preventing radicalization. When we look at this key element, we understand that the most important and successful approach to handling radicalization is the approach of empathy, which respects human rights. The main key concepts and governing principles on actions against radicalization has been set up at the international level by the United Nations and other specialized agencies or cooperative bodies. Because defeating extremism, radicalization, and terrorism, which are a global threat, must be countered through common principles without isolation. It has to be a common act. It should be synchronized. In order to do this, many international organizations at the regional level have helped United Nations in implementing those principles. A wide range of such initiatives have been undertaken in India and Asian region. Now, let us look at the measures adopted globally as well as regionally. When we look at the measures, we generally come to a conclusion that there are two broad measures which are adopted. The first one is the repressive measures, and the second one is the preemptive measures. As we are looking at the as we are looking at the human rights approach, it is important for us to look at the preemptive measures because repressive measures are generally do not take into consideration emphatically the various rights, natural, human, or fundamental rights of the citizens, but its major focus is on repressing radicalism. But the preemptive measures takes into considerations all the natural rights, human rights, fundamental rights, democratic rights, and the processes laid down by the law. In the preemptive measures, the first major point is deepening knowledge about the process of radicalization and the analysis as to why the radicalization takes place. The second point is countering extremist narratives and misuse or distortions of beliefs. It is very important because the unless and until we provide an alternative view which is convinced by an individual, de-radicalization and prevention of radicalization is difficult. And if we take this point into consideration, we can minimize collective victimization. In the preemptive measures, the third point that we need to take into consideration is, in order to minimize the radicalization among the population, it is important to empowering the youth, empowering the communities, and empowering the civil society agents to the process of de-radicalization. Next point we have to take into consideration, providing individual psychological, educational, and social support, because in any approach to be successful, empathy is the most important part. At the heart of preemptive measures lies the human rights approach to tackling the challenges of radicalization. The cornerstone principles while planning any action of fighting radicalization should consider certain points. Now, let us look at those points. Any plan of action for success against radicalization should have certain cornerstone principles as follows. The most important principle is respect for human rights. The second important principle is respect for obligations under international humanitarian law and under international refugee law, because these are laws which have been scientifically coded and widely accepted across the globe and across the civilizations. The third important point is importance of understanding the democracy and rule of law while planning any plan of action. Second principle is cooperative action is always welcome as a more fruitful one than individual state action. There is a need to reinforce states' international cooperation in criminal matters. A preventive approach should be prioritized rather than a repressive approach. The main purposes are, action against radicalization should serve two main purposes. The first purpose is to reinforce the legal framework against terrorism and violent extremism. Second is to prevent radicalization in places where it is currently taking place, in locations such as schools, prisons, and on internet platforms. There are certain limits when any radicalization or de-radicalization process is taking place. These limits are, actions against radicalization should be based on human rights. Fighting radicalization without respecting human rights runs counter to international law and is then hence counterproductive. There are certain new challenges for radicalization. These new challenges have been put forward by new technologies and emerging technologies which have a crucial role in modern terrorism and radicalization. In these new platforms are used in order to disseminate terrorist propaganda mainly through the internet. These new platforms and technologies are also used for recruiting sympathizers, as access to people globally is made possible by these technologies. These technologies are used for training people on how to contribute to terrorist actions, groups, etc. These technologies are effectively being used for the purposes of self radicalization. These technologies also are smartly utilized as a barrier for collecting evidence or using it. Hence, any legal action is also difficult. When we come to the conclusion of why it is important to look at the human rights, because consequently and in conclusion, a global interdisciplinary approach is most needed. Fighting radicalization is only possible by means of human rights approach, because of all the approaches, this approach is the one which is based on empathy, which is based on respect for the fundamental rights which are essential for the proper growth and development of an individual from his birth till death. This approach also utilizes the importance of natural rights, because as we know, victimization is based on some or the other sense of inequality and sense of being oppressed. Hence, if an empathic path is utilized, it becomes quite easier to ensure that the people are not taken to an extreme limit, and hence moderate approach is required, which is the human rights approach. Thank you.